with a company called DataSift, very local to here at the Reading Enterprise Centre, and actually when I started it, it was the Enterprise Centre was nowhere near as flash as this. It was an old one of the H-block science buildings, and my small room that barely had room for 3 people, and we had a little chair that you wheeled in for visitors. Had a pipe down the side, which was clearly one of the old science gas pipes that they'd just blocked off. So it was from a very much humble beginnings. So give you context of what we do now, and then I'm happy to, because there's a million things I could talk about, but and I'll let you guys tell me some of the things you'd like to hear. I've covered the whole gamut of going from 3 people, we're now 120 people. So we've raised $70 million. The company's now worth in the region of, which VC you ask, but somewhere between 300 and 400 million. So we're quite a big company now. So I've been through everything you can think of in terms of angel investment, VCs. All of our VCs are US companies, so I can talk a lot about the implications of dealing with the US and raising money over there. So, what we actually do is, why we've become so big over the last 8 years is, the original idea of the business was, how do you take RSS feeds and make sense of them? So back then RSS was pretty big, you probably will remember. Google Reader was big at the time, and we had this crazy idea that if you could automate the understanding of the text within the feed, you could make it more valuable to consumers and to businesses. So we spent a year building technology to basically do a kind of natural language processing and built a lot of infrastructure for aggregating data. So we were collecting about 1 million feeds from every different blog you could think of, but very different to what everyone else was doing. We were automatically categorizing the content. So instead of you choosing to read TechCrunch or whatever your favorite blog was, you could choose a subject area to read. That was semi-successful. We were able to raise a little bit more money from that to then continue. But this little thing at the time that most people thought of was pretty insignificant, and was to do something you did when you sat on the toilet, was Twitter, because that's how most people in the UK thought of it at the time. It was something, if you went to a business person, what relevance has this got to business, and I said to my board at the time, because we had raised angel money, we're going to move the whole business to being, instead of RSS feeds, we're going to make it so it's based on Twitter data and use that signal data from that to curate news and curate content. They thought I was crazy, all voted on the boards for me not to do it. I ignored them because I owned most of the company. And none of them now thank me for that. I should keep reminding them. And that kind of created a product at the time called TweetMe, and it was basically a news aggregator based upon the signals from everyone sharing. So we had the full, what everyone these days calls the Twitter fire hose, which is literally every bit of data coming out of Twitter, and we automatically curated it. So we applied that same technology of understanding what people said, we just were applying it to tweets instead. And that created a news site that went from 0 to 20 million users in 9 months. So that got on quite a few people's radar, allowed us to raise money in the US from a couple of very famous US investors, one called Mark Suster. If you ever want to read, probably the best venture capitalist who blogs about how to run businesses, look up a blog called Both Sides of the Table. He runs a fund called Upfront. Really worth a read if you've not read anything like that. So raised money from them, and then that turned into this business, which is DataSift, because what we saw at the time was, as is right at the beginning, it wasn't just about the consumers, it was we started to see people were seeing the value in what we were doing with social, that if you can find the right content for consumers, you can probably find the right content for businesses. So actually, within a year, we were making more money from selling the services to understand the data for businesses than we were from advertising. And that tells you two facts. Is it takes a lot of page impressions to make any money out of advertising, and there's always an angle for business to do things when there's a consumer side of it, because actually business tends to be a lot more forgiving of what products are than consumers are. Consumers can go somewhere else very easily. Businesses tend to get locked in and just want things that work. They don't need to be, rocket science at times. Anyway, so that turned into DataSift. We then continued to extend the technology. We rounded up all of the other social networks, so Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, WordPress, you name them, we have coverage over them. So that was very much about business development, bringing in more data sources, and then growing the business internationally. So about 4 years ago, we opened a US office. That was off the back of raising the money. Opened a US office, grew out in San Francisco, grew out in New York, and that pretty much followed a fixed path from being a SaaS business, being our sales being very predictable based upon how many salespeople you hire equals your growth. So the more money you raise, the more people you can hire, and the faster the whole thing goes. It starts getting quite scary because the cost of hiring and the cost of having those salespeople is upfront quite expensive, but the results speak for themselves. So that got us to where we are. We continue to grow. We're going to end up we double our size. We're about somewhere between 120, 130. I lose track of the number, but by prediction for next year is we'll be by the end of next year we'll be over 200. So we continue to grow. We'll probably raise more money sometime in Q1 next year. People keep trying to give you money. One of the things you find once you get through the early stages, because I think me raising our Series A money, which was about 8 million, was probably one of the most painful experiences of my life. Spending a year basically trudging around the US trying to convince people that this strange European company should be something they should make a bet on. And generally when you're doing a Series A, you are literally, they're taking a bet because you're likely to have low revenue and they are betting on an idea rather than on predictable revenue. It becomes much easier when you're successful because you're literally, when you get to Series B, Series C, they're just looking at the business model. Is it repeatable? Can it grow? If we insert more money, does it get bigger? So what then tends to happen is, instead of me trying to phone up VCs and then ignoring my emails, I get lots of VCs ringing me up and sending emails that I ignore. So it's nice the tables get turned, and I can ignore them when I want to. So that's the very short story of the business. I'm very happy to talk about. My background is as a programmer. I worked in the games industry for nearly 14 years. From programmer 89, went straight into the games industry, programmed 5 or 6 different games back in the era of Super Nintendos and PlayStation 1s, and that gave me a pretty good grounding in understanding how to build large-scale projects, because the teams got larger and larger within the games industry, so I knew how to run large teams. But then I moved into the management side, became a producer, which what they class within the games industry is basically the manager of the project. So from the product, the marketing, all sides of it. So that gave me a very good grounding of that. Went all the way up to running some of the biggest studios. I ran several of the biggest titles at Codemasters, which some of you may have known, before I got bored completely of games. Then when I worked for Sky for a year and launched all of the interactive division at Sky, or games on Sky, if you've ever pressed the red button and seen the games on that, I launched all of that with Sky. Got completely fed up with that because that involved lawyers. That's all I ever did with them, was literally licensing deals and dealing with the legal implications of trying to do something like that at that scale with Sky, which it did teach me a lot with lawyers, but it wasn't much fun. And then I'm sure you've all got your stories about why you decided to do a crazy thing of run your own business. My wife told me that I was completely unemployable because I argued with everyone I ever worked for, so you should go do it yourself, which is actually how it started. So I'm happy to tackle any subject that you would like tonight on fundraising, how to build teams, because I think that people always ask me what's the most important thing that I've learned along the way, and it is about telling a story. And the reason why I say telling a story is because it's let me achieve everything I've done along the way, because hiring people is the most important thing, but you can only hire really good people because generally you're asking them to come to work for you for very little money, and you can only do that if you can tell them a good story about what you're doing. So throughout everything I've done, it's been learning to be better at presenter. And I always say to people, if you want to be CEO of your business, you have to be able to confidently tell a story. If you can't hire someone or find a co-founder that can, because you will fail unless you do that when you get to a certain size. And the other thing I would say is anyone can do it, because before I started this business, I was not someone who would ever have stood up in this small group, let alone next week I'll be standing in front of 5,000 people, which faces me a bit at times. Best to not look at the crowd. I would never, that would have probably made me faint try and do that back then, but you can learn to do it. It is something, it's like just anything else, it is just practice. And literally, I think my favourite story from actually learning is there's a I don't know if you've ever been to it in London, there's a event every month called Bar Camp. And it's literally a space this similar size, but it has a bar, and every Friday end of the month, they literally have 5 companies pitch, but it is in front of lots of drunk people. And so there's a good side to that in that, look, if it goes horribly wrong, the only people you've pitched in front of are a load of, rowdy media people. But on the plus side, if you do a good job, you can actually make them listen. So, and that was actually my baptism of fire, which was standing in front of 200 odd people in that arena, learning to present. And it really has just been a thing, me, doing more and more presenting. And because in the end, if you want to raise money, you've got to convince angels, so therefore that's pitching. If you want to pitch to get more money from VCs, you have to get better and better at it, because if you think of the statistics of how many people try to raise money versus how many people get it, so a typical statistic for an early stage VC is they see 2,000 people a year. And how many deals do you think they do? Any guesses?
2 to 4.
Yeah, so some might do a little higher, but max is 6. It really depends on where they are in the cycle of their fund, because it depends, how much of their spend and whether they're following on and whether they've got capacity. But that's one thing to know is that their success rate. They see a lot of people, and in the end, the ones that get noticed are the ones that can tell them the story in the simplest way and the most convincing. And that is what people have always said to me. I've been very lucky with feedback, is people believe what I've said. I'm lucky that I've got a programmer background, that I'm running a technology company, that when I tell them something, they don't think I'm bullshitting them. But it is having that confidence and being able to present a story in a really, really clear way, because generally you don't get very long to do it. You really don't, and you don't get second chances either. Generally, if you get invited in to present, if they say no, in fact, actually, no VC ever says no. By the way, just a little tip: no VC ever says no. They'll always say that's very interesting, because they never want to close a door on a potential deal. Because if you come back years later and they've said no to you, that's going to piss you off, and they don't get to do your later round. So no one ever says no, but it always confuses people, because most people's optimistic reaction as an entrepreneur is to think, well, they didn't say no, so they must be interested, which isn't correct. If they're interested, they'll ring you up the next day and offer you a term sheet. That's the reality. Things become quite harsh in those kind of environments that, we are naturally optimistic about things, but the reality is they have so little time to talk to people that they will show their interest. I've seen deals done literally in the meeting, where literally people have gone in and they've walked away with almost checks. I don't know if they've ever walked away with a bag of cash, but certainly with term sheets in hand, for sure. So, anyway, I'm going to stop there again and actually do what I said, which was, is there anything else any of you'd like to hear specifically?
I would love to hear how you engage with raising money in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is I'm trying to raise 15 million quid to set up a supercomputing company. Supercomputer executes 2 million lines of Fortran in one clock tick.
Okay.
And the States would be a good place to get the money from. How do I engage with this? You said you spent a year there.
I did two things. First of all, I got to know the London scene really, really well, because there were still a lot of funds, none that I would take money from myself, but they all had US counterparts. So one thing I did was I networked incessantly, even though I lived out here, just by where I used to live like 5 minutes down the road. So I was doing this by taking the training every single night and going to a networking event every single night of the week for 2 years. So, that's the kind of commitment it takes to do it. So I got to know pretty much every partner, and by the way, it is only worth knowing partners of funds. If you're caring about, angels are different, but if you're caring about raising money, you don't want to talk to any of the people that are below them at all. Whatever the title is, unless they are partner, it's not worth talking to them. Take their card, shake their hand, whatever, but the only route into getting funding is to talk to one of the partners, because they're the ones that on the Monday meeting are the ones that go, I'm interested in this company, should we start talking about it? Because everyone else is literally scouts, and the scouts have very little say in it. You have to get through to the partners. Anyway, back to the question. So 2 years of doing that, and I then started going to more US-based events, but I wasn't going out there like every month or anything. I would go to events related to the field we're in. So, and a lot of the startup-related kind of events that attract investors, and I got to know quite a few of the kind of not tier 1, probably tier 2 funds. Just again by networking while I was out there. Now, none of the funds will take, you can't ring them up, you can't, there's no point, you can send emails to them, it's pointless, none of them will do it. The only way in is via some kind of mutual introduction. And so what most people do is by being out, they will camp out in San Francisco for a month. They will go to all the networking events, meet people, get to know a few people, and then find who can do the intros, because you have to have an intro. And then that can kind of, spiral from there if you can get to know more and more people. Clearly, if you're a more public company, it's a lot easier, because then you can just say, I'm this person, you've seen it, it's been on TechCrunch, it's been on wherever else. The other thing I would say is why we were successful being a European company is I was very lucky to get Robert Scoble. Robert Scoble is reasonably well known in the Valley, ex-Microsoft evangelist. He was over in London for some event. I went into London that night, I was following him, so again it's all about stalking people, I'm afraid. Saw that he was going to be in London at a particular pub. Luckily I knew the person that was running the event. Got invited along to it, doorstepped in, and basically he then did a video of me 30 minutes in the top floor of that pub, and published it that night, and that basically gave us a huge amount of coverage because he had a very big following. So that helped massively, because then I was on his radar. He must have written about us 20 or 30 times over the last 4 or 5 years, but I did it by, going, finding him, and there's plenty of journalists out there that are prepared to listen to a story if people are insistent enough, and in the end it is about being, a bit insistent, and again, telling a story, because again, he wouldn't have listened to me unless I had, Strobel makes his money by telling good founder stories. So you've got to have something there to be, because he gets pitched incessantly. And so most VCs do. So again, Mark Suster, one of our investors, he says he must, whenever he's walking somewhere within any event he goes to, literally people will constantly walk up to him and try and do a 60-second pitch. Don't know any of you bother trying doing that. The whole idea of a elevator pitch, as they call it, never ever works. I've asked all of my investors, have you ever invested in anything that someone come and gave you an elevator pitch? And they said, no, not once. Because it didn't get, again, they get it too often. So what you can say in 60 seconds isn't actually enough. It's not true. You need to have someone said to them that they trust, that they have heard the story, that they know the founder, know the company, and that you should listen to them. That's the only way to do it.
So I've got a question.
Sure.
Sorry. So let's say, for example, as a founder of a business, you're not actually as insane enough to be stalking people every night. You have commitments. You possibly so this ties into my other thing, which is how are you earning money while you were doing all that? So how was that funded? How did you manage to have the time whilst I presume family?
Why are you going to have time? So I always say my wife is my co-founder because she put up with it. So it's what you want to achieve, because I'm not saying everyone can put that amount of time in. I'm just telling you what I did to be able to get to the size we are. That kind of commitment.
So my question is are there agents out there of some sort? There
certainly are, but they're what I call sharks.
Yeah.
Because they literally will eat you alive. So anyone that comes along promising that they can get you in some kind of event pitch out, and I don't know, there's quite a few around or used to be around the UK where pay to play, don't ever do it, because literally they tend to be, you pay £500 and then they get a room of 12 angels. It's always a con, always a con. If it seems too good to be true, it's that old adage, it almost certainly is. So, no, I can't, try and, anything where they promise they can get you in front of this and this, they'll always want 5 or 10% of the fee of what you raise. So, that's instantly going to cripple you. The investors don't like it because that means the money's not going into the company itself that needs the money. So they are, don't just do it direct, because there's always ways. The internet's a fantastic place for finding people.
So the final part of my sort of intrigue is that initial embryonic stage where you set up, you decided to go with it. What was the size of your core team? How did you decide who was going to be your core team? And what were the real kind of scary bits right at the beginning when all could fall apart?
Yeah, so good question. The 3 people for probably 9 months, and then I think we took on a couple more I think we never got any more than 6 or 7 people in the first 2 years, if that.
Were they friends who you worked with?
No, I didn't. They just engineers that I hired. They were, I think two of the guys were straight from university. Go back to my games background. The games industry always hires straight from university because they don't like people from other industries because they teach them bad habits in programming. And so I followed that same ethos, which is, I knew what I wanted to build was something no one else had ever built. So what was the point of trying to get experience? What I wanted was talent. So I did a lot of interviewing to find some really just core smart people, and actually I'm just trying to think who, only one of those original 5 people that joined me is not with the company now. So
and how was that funded?
so I partially funded, and then we raised an initial angel within the first few months of £150,000, and then we did a larger angel round a year or so later to take it up to about £1 million. So before we then went and did serious money with the VCs.
How difficult was it to get angel funding?
I don't know, because I think I got money from the first person I spoke to. So I was incredibly naive back then as well. Just there's so much to learn about the legals of fundraising. But thankfully, I worked with a guy that was incredibly knowledgeable himself. He sold several businesses, so I fell on my feet a little bit with that. But again, I think it's a little bit of being able to spot the right kind of person. But there was certainly a bit of luck involved.
With the VCs, you said they're all from the States. They're
Yes.
on the West Coast, or have you got any East?
We've got 2 East Coast. So we had two funds in our Series A. One was East, one was West. That was actually quite deliberate because the East Coast fund was very data-centric business, and the West Coast fund was very knowledgeable in media and social.
Do you find the East Coast funds are a bit more conservative than the West Coast?
No, they do tend to come from slightly different backgrounds, but that's a big generalisation of, obviously New York especially has Wall Street, so you do get a lot of bankers background. I'd say there's probably more entrepreneurial VCs in the Valley. I think if they did, if anyone tracked like that, I would say I tended to meet more VCs with a business background or previously running a business on the West Coast, but I haven't met hundreds of East Coast funds just because I spent way more time on the West Coast.
Did you go American VCs because they were more speculative over the UK?
Because they pay a much higher valuation. It's literally as simple as that. You can there's no arguing with it. For whatever you could raise here, you could raise 2 to 3 times the valuation in the US. So whether you want to call that, whether they're risk averse, whether you want to call it that it's just the macroeconomics of European setup that don't allow them to pay higher, but that's the fact in doing it. And obviously not everyone can raise in the US, but it does clearly, if you can raise at 3 times the valuation, that means you can raise 3 times the amount of money at the same dilution as your competitor who is raising in the UK. And if that means you've got 3 times the money, that means you can grow 3 times faster, and that means you're going to almost always win. So, if from a competitive advantage, it's a no-brainer that you always, because there's also something you learn about dilution and scale as you raise money, that actually the dilution is not important, it's the valuation that's important.
What was the valuation for your first angel investment? What was it?
Oh,
And what stage were you
I'm
at?
not sure I can disclose it. It was in the tens of millions.
With the initial angel investor?
Not the angel investor, no, that was it. That was in millions. It's still in millions there.
Really?
Yeah.
Based on what? What did you have at that point?
a story? I told you.
That's
all I had.
You didn't have any code, you didn't have any.
Yeah, we had, but we hadn't finished the product.
But you were 3, 6 months, 9 months into.
3 months in.
3 months in.
Yeah.
Do you even have a working prototype? Or?
No, don't think so. No, I think we might have had some, something, nothing complete for sure. Nothing complete.
Presumably you had at least some customers interested in it.
No.
No,
Why
not even that.
are customers involved at this point?
You've
got it's all about belief. It really, I think it's just one thing. The lesson take from this is it's all about belief.
I think my sense is that's changed a little bit since then.
Well, I'd say it's become even way easier with angels now because the kind of networks that existed when I did it just didn't. You go into London now and it's much easier to find angels than it was before. Much easier.
So I've got this image of yourself, the king on top with 7 or 8 engineers. And what was your first sort of milestones in terms of you're a consumer product, software as a service?
Yeah.
And so I'm really interested in finding out how you managed to gain traction in that, whether it was just because there was someone else doing it. How did you manage to get into a point where you had so many users? And then what was the story or the event that made you realise that you went into more of a business-to-business?
So the growth and awareness was literally just being, tenacious about how to get PR because it's, it's not hard. It really, getting out there and getting people to listen to you is just about work. And I literally use it incessantly when I get home. If I would not be working late, when I got home, I would literally spend the evening emailing journalists. That was my evening was. This was obviously a couple of years in where we had a product and we were moving to being tweet meme and being Twitter based. It was literally trying to tell stories to them, write blog posts, send. So it comes back to my. I was saying to someone else about PR, which was journalists want an easy life, and so I always used to write the story for them. So I wouldn't send. I'm well known inside our business of hating press releases. The press releases are for big corporations. They're pointless. They just, every journalist gets thousands a day, literally thousands, and the only ones they'll look at are ones that are, either have something attached with them, or they know that it's such a big company that if they're going to write about an Oracle press release, aren't they, or a Twitter press release, or a Facebook press release. But if they hear so and so company they've never heard of, and they see a press release, and they're going to go, oh yeah, that's not interesting. But if you can catch their eye and have something where there's some thread where you've been looking at what their theme they write about. Because all journalists have themes that they're interested in. So I follow people on Twitter and I would see what they were thinking about and I would send them say, oh, I saw you were talking about this. Have you thought about this angle? And if you were writing about that, could you include a piece from us? Because this is something we're doing. And it's common sense in the end. It's just to try and people want their jobs made easier and for them to look better. So if you can, do that. So that's all we did. So the growth was, I say, Robert Scoble helped massively. I was also very lucky in my angel investment to have Guy Kawasaki as one of my angel investors, if you know Guy. So that Guy taught me a lot in marketing and guerrilla tactics of marketing. So and just having Guy tweeting on our behalf helped massively. But how did I get Guy? Because we were very public. Guy actually reached out to me and said, do you want to meet? And it was like, okay, one of the guys that Kawasaki want to meet me, but he became involved in the business, and it's all those sort of things were created by just building awareness.
Why did he want to meet with you?
Because he heard about the company. He was one of the very early Twitter adopters, had a huge following back then, and still does, and wanted to leverage the technology himself, wanted to be involved in the company, and so he's been he comes and talks at some of our conferences and is an advisor whenever we want him. So he's been a fantastic supporter.
Have you only ever given equity out for direct investment, or have you ever given it in lieu of a service?
We have to, and it's very traditional to give percentages to board advisors. So yes, but choose wisely because there's generally no way of getting that equity back. So if you find people that you can, that are going to be long-term useful to the business, then definitely do it. But just think about one of the numbers I always talk about is most companies have a 20% option pool. If you're ever going to raise money, most VCs will start about 10%, but by the time you get slightly larger, 20% of your company will be allocated to your staff in some way, one or another. That's the US model, by the way. Most UK companies is much less, but that's the average in the US. So you have to think about, every percentage you're giving away is, less for, your own employees. So be, very, very. My experience has taught me was be as lean as you can in terms of allocating percentages to people in the early stage, because you always need it later. And if you get it wrong, then it just dilutes the business.
Couple of questions.
Sure.
Roll the clock forward to 2020. Where are you going to be then? And what's your exit? What's your ambition now?
We still have quite a few years. Most companies that IPO take 12 years. Doing it in less is very rare. So we have another good 2-3 years ahead of us. You never know if you're going to get acquired, because you can only ever make that decision when someone comes to try and acquire you. So our goal is never, and it should always be the cases. Your goal should always never be to get acquired. But the reality is, if you're VC backed, you've either got to be acquired or you've got to float. You can't stay private forever.
How many serious offers have you had?
I can't do that.
10, 20?
What are the big opportunities for you going forward? I mean, sector-wise.
Well, social is still, the penetration of the use of it is still tiny, really, really tiny. So there's more and more networks, more data being made, and companies are only at the tip of the iceberg of. Right now, it's mainly marketing departments that use it, but we are seeing use cases in health, banking. You use it a lot for research. So it's how it slowly penetrates beyond just the norm of brand monitoring into how do you integrate this data right into the core of a business and join what we start. Our biggest projects tend to be working in the enterprise where they've got some kind of view of, well, I know who my customers are out on social, because they're just, in 10 years ago, everyone used to ask for email addresses. Now everyone asks for either, an OAuth token to attach to Facebook or Twitter, or your ID on one of those networks. And at that point, they know you, and, they can then think about, okay, if someone's complaining on that social network and they're, one of my mobile phone customers, I should probably, reach out to them from customer services. And people actually like that. They like to be companies to be proactive. So I think it's all about, in the future, what they call single view of the customer. How you bring the internal data of about your customers within your business and joining to the data about them on the website and the data about them on a forum and on the social networks.
Yeah, that's part of my question is partly prompted by my background is life sciences, biotech, and pharmaceuticals. And increasingly, in talking to R&D people, they're interested in what people who take medication are saying about their medications, because it opens opportunities up for certain medication that might not work in one indication, has effects in other disease states. And what the social grapevine is so social media is saying about individuals taking medications and opening up and identifying opportunities for other indications for the same drugs, which can then be properly investigated. It's one of the trends.
I mean, I can't say who does it with us, but we have several big conglomerates that do that with our platform.
So in relative layman terms, how does DataSift compare to Watson in terms of its?
Well, Watson is just an engine, and we work with IBM or with the Watson team because they don't have access to the data, so we are the conduit. But they are trying to solve very much a much deeper problem of full human understanding, whereas we have machine learning, we have natural language processing, and we also, the thing that's actually been the most successful for us is we actually built our own programming language. So our system is actually programmable by our customers. So we've never locked any of our customers into one way of doing things. What we offer is almost like a Amazon AWS solution where with EC2 you upload your own code and your own operating system. It's not obviously quite that broad what you can do with us, but we have a language that allows you to teach our platform to understand text in the way you want it to do. So we basically invented the language for doing text processing. So that's part of our IP and why we're valuable, because that language is unique, it is proprietary, and it's probably very like stay proprietary, but it does allow our customers to upload rules to understand text in multiple languages. So you can basically train our system to understand things like intent detection, so you can understand, see what people are saying, and it's all so it's machine learning, NLP, all the way down to just simplistic keyword matching if that's what you wanted to do. But these days, much of what we do is pretty big, heavy lifting kind of analysis of the data.
So is there a plan possibly that you do an entire loop, and that there's a business section for you that operates, that allows the SME market almost sort of take a stripped down version and configure it and build it and develop it for themselves, and you are just open, you don't really give any of the, you maybe have support and user groups and those things, but you don't give any of the high-end consultancy and sales.
Well, we don't actually. So we one thing that we do very little of is pro services. So we are a platform company. So we serve some direct customers in terms of a big brand who wants to deal with the processing the data themselves, but mainly we are powering other applications. So we have our own little ecosystem of businesses that are powered by our platform. So yeah, so we kind of have that in the, we have a range from tiny, we do have small startups who build products from scratch on top of us. In fact, we've had a number of big success stories where literally people launched on our platform about the time when we launched, and they went through rounds of funding and then sold in the time that we've been live, so which has been a great story.
Can I drag you back to the funding?
Sure.
What would your advice be for myself, for instance, a student with no background, not well, I'm probably a student essentially founded a technology company, in getting funding for free products?
Are you technical yourself?
I can build a computer, that's about it.
Right.
Program.
Then my first advice was find a technical co-founder, because a lot of people, I find a lot of people that have gone down the track of paying independent developers to build their app for them, their own website, and they invariably fail, I'm afraid, because when you get down the line, the investor goes, so who built it? Who's the brains behind this? And you go, that agency over there, and they go, okay, bye, because the value of and the knowledge isn't in the company, if it's built by someone else. So if you take that logic backwards, that means you have to have someone in your business that is a co-founder, and that doesn't mean they need to be on equal terms with you, because I see a lot of instances of successful businesses where the co-founders come along later in the business, didn't have the wild idea, so they don't get the same percentage, but they are, they come along and still be a co-founder, still have a reasonable chunk of the company, but then that means that they're, attached to the VC wants to see people, or angels want to see people that are committed to a business, and that, that knowledge is going to stay in the business.
Do they need to have directly programmed it, or do they need to, can someone who is a project manager, so they have the technical understanding, but they've actually farmed it out?
I've never seen it work. I'm sure it has done. I've just never seen it work. Just because, again, it's if I was in the investor's shoes, my first question would be, what happens if that agency goes bust, or those bust? Who's going to manage the code? Who's going to, it just, and when you project out further, when you think about patents and you think about, IP protection in general, you can only do those things if you own it and you built it and you have the knowledge.
So ask you yourself as an entrepreneur, the one I think you had the initial idea of things and the smash it profit. How much did you give yourself at the beginning? How much did you give yourself? How much were you willing to give away at the beginning to other partners? And
I think that comes back to, it's not about the percentage necessarily. I always say to people, fundraising is about value of shares, not how much you own that's left. People always ask me, not always ask me, but people do ask, how much of the company do you still own? That's not relevant. It's like, how much is your share of the business worth? Yeah. That's all that matters.
What about your...
Clearly you don't want to give away, you don't want to don't believe anything you see on Dragon's Den, they're all idiots. You don't want to give away 50% of their business. It just doesn't make any sense. But clearly there is a relationship between the opportunity of, what those shares are valued at, rather than, and clearly once you do your first round, the game you're playing is purely this, which is every subsequent round is whether after dilution is your share worth more than it was before. So even if you get diluted by half, if the value that they put on those shares is 4 times, that's a good thing still. So that's all it really, those are obviously wildly out of whack numbers, but just to illustrate, I think that all that matters is what you are left with and what it's valued at, because when you finally sell or float, all you care about is the price of the shares, not how many you've got.
Did you value direct financial return for the business as a priority, or did you value you maintaining voting control?
Totally different issue. So voting control is, I would say, just an early stage. Clearly, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you've still got absolute control even of a public company. You want to obviously try and keep control as long as you can, because my sense always is that if a hard decision needs to be made that you believe in, and the VCs won't ever believe in this, because that there is, you need to be able to make that change with or without them, and that just goes by experience. So the nicety is certainly to try and keep those rights intact. So that in that instance, you just need good lawyers to make sure that the things that you get put in place. The other thing obviously is weighting of boards. Don't have lots of investors on the board that can outvote you. Because clearly so you fill up we always had more advisors on the board than we had investors initially during the kind of angel stage. So it's just trying to keep some kind of balance there. And even if you can't get more yourselves that are on your side, at least have an independent chairman that is like the 5th member. Let's say you have 2
I think I'm very aware that we're taking your evening, so
Right.
I just want maybe one more question.
Sure.
Can
so I
I
know-
offer you something?
Yes.
On Friday, data safety are coming to me
I
at
think
the university,
good.
to try and recruit my finalist students, 150 computer science students. It would be great if you would come along too and talk to them.
Sure, I'll be more than happy to.
Great.
As long as my schedule permits, but I'm not in charge. As you found out, I'm not in charge of my schedule.
I've got the PA's details if you want them.
So can I ask a sort of final code? So when you first started out, what was your biggest fear? What was your biggest drive? What was that biggest thing in your bag which kept you up at night and kept you pumping those emails out?
So I actually had a journalist interviewing me earlier asking me that question. I said, nothing, if things are keeping you up at night, don't do it, was my answer. Things don't keep, you know, because he was actually interviewing me on questions of when there's been a number of high profile CEOs stepping down. He was asking me the question of when should you, if you're founder, step away from being CEO, and I said, was when it's the right thing for the company and that you don't feel 100% confident that you're doing the best thing for the company.